Awesome. Well, welcome back to week 5 of Summit. We are so excited you're here. If you've made it this far, that's a big goal. We're super excited that you were able to stick with us and learn. And we know it's been a little uncomfortable as we've been trying to learn and grow and do some self evaluation. And the topics we've been talking about are, in some ways, really easy to understand, a little bit more difficult to apply. So I congratulate you and apologize you for sticking around for this long and having the dedication to go through the process of growing as a leader. And so I'm with Pastor Craig,
Hi,
and
guys
we are super excited to be here today.
and girls.
And gals, guys, gals, girls. So today we're talking about the week is called Splinters and Beams, Pastor Craig. So we are going to take some time and talk about what that looks like in the Bible, what we mean by that. And as Summit has changed a lot as we've been working through it, we're more about Pastor Will and I actually had a conversation where we talked about trying to articulate very clearly what the goal of Summit was, and the language he sort of came around and was picking up the pieces as we've been talking was Christ-likeness.
Yeah.
And so as we say, character is the foundation, as you talked about in Soul Priority, that sermon series. Paul reiterated to Timothy a lot, right? Character is where it all needs to start. I thought that was a really good series.
Yep.
So I'm just going to jump right in and
let's do it.
read through the passage, and then you can give us your pastoral insights to it.
All right, we'll see what we
So
got.
Matthew 7, 1 through 5 is where this week is rooted in. So we try to keep a biblical perspective on leadership as we keep going. So Matthew 7, 1 through 5 says, "Do not judge so that you won't be judged. For you will be judged by the same standard with which you judge others, and you will be measured by the same measure you use. Why do you look at the splinter in your brother's eye, but don't notice the beam of wood in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the splinter out of your eye,' and look, there's a beam of wood in your own eye? Hypocrite." I like how the CSB puts an exclamation point there. "First take the beam of wood out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye." That's a lot.
It is a lot.
So what are your
Wow.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the first really important thing to realize on this passage, and I mean, it really hits on a theme that's all throughout the scripture, is a lot of times we think about Jesus as this passive guy, and everybody loves the hippie Jesus kind of image of love, and he certainly, there's an aspect of that, right? That is undeniable. God is love. Jesus is God, so therefore Jesus is love. But I love passages like this that give us another side that kind of provide us some balance on who Jesus is. If we're going to be people who are modeling our life after Jesus, if we're going to be pursuing Christ likeness, if that's the definition of our character, then we need to have a pretty good handle on, okay, what does that mean to model Christ likeness? And so a passage like this is so important because Jesus actually did have some really hard things to say. And most of the time, he had really hard things to say to those people who should have known better, right? These passages, the context of these are, he's speaking to the Pharisees. He's speaking to the, if this was 2026 and Jesus was here, it's like he would be speaking to the pastors. He would be speaking to the elders. Like that's the context of the passage like this. And so one of the things that frustrated Jesus time and time again is this idea of religious leaders, religious people determining the rules of the game by which they wanted, or they chose and were comfortable with, and they set the standard on that basis, and then they held people to that standard rather than to the standard of what God had actually called them to do. And so, that's the one thing that makes Jesus frustrated time and time and time again, is when people use religiosity, when they use religion as a way to beat people down rather than call people up to the standard that God actually has. So, it's important for us today. That's this passage is all about. It's not saying that anything goes. It's not saying that we just have a willy-nilly approach to life. There's absolutely things that we speak into, but there's not a group of people who, okay, well, we have it all together because we know how to play the rules of the game based off the rules of the game that we have set up. And these people obviously don't have it together. So we're just going to like ostracize them and, and make ourselves feel better by pushing away, that other group. So that's what this is all about. It's just saying, God's standard is a really high standard. In fact, none of us can meet that standard. That's why Jesus came to die on the cross for our sins, to bridge that gap for us. It's an impossible standard. So when we remember that, we're all in this perspective or posture of self-evaluating, looking at our own flaws, areas where God is at work in our life. And when we see other people through that lens of self-evaluation first, it gives us a ton of grace for people. Sure, we speak truth, we still call people up, but not from a posture of like, I got it together, you don't. It's more from a posture of God is at work in my life, and there's tremendous benefit by bending my life to the book, to what God has to say. And I want to challenge you to do the same, as I am engaged in that process too. And that's what that passage is really getting at.
Yeah, when I was reading before, doing some research, one of the things that popped up was when it says, "You will be judged by the same standard." Apparently, in the ancient rabbinic teachings, there was they would say that God was going to judge the world based on there's going to be a standard of justice and a standard of mercy, and it seems like the idea was whatever way you held people accountable to was, whether it was justice or mercy, or the balance was how Jesus or God would hold you accountable at the end times. And I think growing up, what I saw a lot happen was people would read something like this, and then they would say, okay, well, since I'm not perfect, that means I can't judge anybody, right? Or I can't call anybody out, or I can't help anybody because I still have the beam in my eye, and so therefore I'm not even going to try to do anything. And I always thought that was an interesting perspective. And as we started working on some of the content and philosophy behind developing leaders at Tab, the thing that popped out to me as I read this was that the statement, where's it at? You remove what's obstructing your view, your whatever's in your eye, right, or in your heart, then you will see clearly to take the splinter out of your brother's eye. Wasn't a perhaps or maybe, but it was almost like, it's expected that you care for yourself, evaluate your life, like you said, first, so that way you can help other people rise and be called up to that standard.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a way that Christian, and I put myself in that category. I think there's definitely a way that Christians miss this on both sides of the equation, right? And so you have those that are super comfortable with like judging other people, or unfortunately, or calling out a particular sin of somebody and harping on that, and and having this us versus them kind of mentality, right? And so this scripture clearly says that's out of bounds, right? Like, okay, there are people who are dealing with this or that, but we all have that beam in our eye that we cannot negate that, as we're looking at the lives of others. So that idea of us versus them is out of the equation. But then the other side of the equation is equally off as well, where it's like, well, I've constantly got this beam in my eye, so I'm just gonna not say anything to anybody or and so the idea is that we're working on ourselves as we're allowing the Spirit to transform us, right? And we're in that process. And then as we experience the benefits of sanctification, right? I mean, as we experience the joy of the Lord and we experience the goodness of God in our life, then we challenge people, but based off of that perspective, because, hey, I'm for you. Like, God has better for you. Like, God's ideal is, yes, it's hard and it's difficult, but there's life when we bend ourselves to God's standard. And so we come at it from a different perspective of, we're casting judgment on something in the sense of like, there is right or wrong in this world, but it's not judgment from the sense of, okay, my words are the final declaration of, whatever this is or isn't. That's God's job. But I am going to challenge you up as I'm doing the same in my life as well, too.
Yeah. What I shared with you the other day about discipleship and what I read in Greg Ogden's book, the idea that discipleship is sometimes it's not always best when it's done in a more teacher student perspective, but it's more of a mutual dependency. And I've sort of been rolling around that in my head a lot.
Mm.
And I think that what's interesting is I think about that. I think like in the perspective of Paul, right? Because Paul was such an incredible evangelist, like going out and doing some incredible things for the kingdom
Hmm.
after being such a opponent of the kingdom. And you see all these letters he's writing where he's talking about the relationships he's built with people, and he's trying to disciple them and point them back towards Christ. And what's interesting is as I think about like that mutual dependency, and it's a partnership to say, okay, I'm trying to pull the beam out of my eye, and I want you to help me pull the beam out of my eye, and you know I want to help you in that process. The the I imagine Paul in that sense, if Timothy would have seen something in Paul that wasn't healthy, right, wasn't godly, wasn't in a healthy spiritual place, Timothy would have said that to Paul, and Paul, is someone because of a grace-filled space where Paul's like, I'm trying to grow and you're trying to grow, and I'm a couple steps ahead of you in some ways, but also would have had the humility in that space to be like, oh yeah, that was my bad. I think
Yeah.
that was an interesting because you as you mentioned, like we're trying to take the beam out of our eye. We're trying to, in our context, lead ourselves first, and
Hmm.
I feel like sometimes we feel like we have to be so many steps ahead of each other, but I think seeing this partnership to say we're growing together, and sometimes it's leading up and sometimes it's leading people that you're having the opportunity to lead and serve,
Hmm.
but I think that we're always in that space of reflecting to then help other people grow.
Yeah.
And I think as we talk about it in this as we talk about it in this context, the idea that comes to mind is, and I've heard it a couple of times, of you've got to uh, put your own oxygen mask on before you help someone else, right? Like you've got to go through the hard work of inviting the Spirit in, and that's what Summit's mostly about, is taking that time to say, where's my gaps, and then
Hmm.
grow and learn in our space. And I think Matthew 7 really captures the beginning of that. When you see Jesus is pretty heated. I mean, hypocrite's a strong word, and
It's very
I
strong.
think it was even stronger back then, right? If you were
Yeah.
saying that, especially to like a Pharisee, that was like, what did we say? Those are fighting words,
Yeah.
And so,
Disrespectful.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
disrespectful. And so there's a lot of strong language in here, and I think what you said about that process, that sanctification is a critical aspect of all of that.
Hmm.
And so we're gonna run out of time if we don't keep cruising too fast. But you got anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I just think that as we're talking about Christ likeness again, I just think it's important for us to, don't read over these passages too quickly. Like, I think these are passages that we need to camp out in every once in a while, just as we're thinking about how God's grace applies to us first, putting the oxygen mask on ourselves first
Mm-hmm.
as we're then leading others, right? And we're always somewhere in that process of where we want to be people who are influencing the lives of others, but we also need to be humble and let other people influence our lives as
Yeah.
well too, as God is working in our lives. So that's all this is really getting at, is just staying humble and being open to how God wants to use us in the lives of others. And so yeah, I think that's just an important principle that we're talking about.
You segue to the next point really well, because we're talking about leading ourselves and then leading others. And I think something we don't have articulated, but I think you said really well right there, was before we try to influence others, sometimes we need to have people influence us, right? And sometimes that's the Holy Spirit. All the time, that's the Holy Spirit.
Sure.
And then sometimes that's relationships in your life where
Mm-hmm.
you're taking that time to let somebody pour into you, let someone
Mm-hmm.
grow in you. And so as we talk about leading ourselves and we talk about leading others, the two definitions we use, and they're a lot easier when we get in the group, we'll really try to narrow down on what these look like. But support is the first word. And we provide the appropriate help others need to do their jobs well. This is to equip people, serve them, and provide the resources needed for those you lead, right? And then challenge is to motivate people by holding them accountable to what they could do if they had the resources. So, like, the way I try to shorten it up and think about it is support is making sure people have everything they need to succeed, whether that's training, resources, equipping, and then challenge is holding them accountable to what they could accomplish if they had that. And so that's the two big definitions we start with as we move towards the support challenge matrix, like trying to understand that support and challenge in the Christian context is really built on grace and truth, right? It's that, just like you talked about, that balance of like, we can't go too far one way where we're judging everybody all the time, and we can't go too far the other way where we're just kind of letting everything be permissible. Because if we don't stand for something, right, if there's no balance, then we'll fall for anything. We won't be, as we talked about in our DNA, there will be no distinction. We'll just be, we won't, we'll be just like the world, we'll be just like everybody else. And
So true.
so the challenge, the support challenge matrix is a tool from Giant that allows us to capture this idea of balancing grace and truth and help us articulate it a little bit. And so as we talk about, support is the y-axis. It's talking about making sure people have what they need. Challenge is that x-axis, and we've used this language on staff for a while now. This is something we don't just use externally, but we have really like adopted into the staff, because it allows you to be able to articulate how someone is leading or how they're not leading. And so I'm going to work way away from the top left if you have the handout and you're looking at it. So if you have high support in an organization or in a culture or in a relationship, and you have low challenge, you have this protection culture, a culture of entitlement and in mistrust. What this seems like, right, is on the extreme end, someone who is like a parent who never disciplines their child, never says no, right? It's a really good example, because they're trying to overprotect them. They're providing so much support, and there's never any challenge. There's never any accountability, that the kid can kind of do whatever they want. The kid becomes a menace, right? Like a crazy little kid, right? And not just because they're a kid, but because they're allowed to just get away with anything. And I'm sure we can all think of people who were like, "Ooh, that kid is going crazy." And so that's an easy way to think about it, or a good example. And so as we keep working our way around, someone who's in a low challenge, low support atmosphere, what you have is this abdication, right? You're not, nobody knows what's going on. It's just gray, right? You're not sending any sort of external communications. You're not making sure people have what they need. And you're also not challenging them to hold up to meet this standard, and a healthy standard, like the realistic expectations. And this typically looks like someone who is like tenured in a role sometimes, and they're just like, I'm really just trying to run out the clock for the last 2 years. I don't really care what you do. I'm kind of good. I just kind of got to keep cruising on. And that's not a healthy space either, because you never know where you sit with those people. And then you have low support and high challenge. This is the dominate quadrant. This is where you're really trying to force compliance. You're really high on pushing limits and making sure they're always meeting the quotas and really driving results, but you're never making sure they have what they need. Sometimes an example of this is like the high school football coach who doesn't, or whenever the players do something wrong, like I'm not a sports guy, so I'm just trying to speak into it, but whenever a player runs a play wrong, the coach just yells some very strong language, and then never tries to coach the kid on, hey, this is where they're wrong, where you messed up. This is what you need to do better. And not that it can't be firm, right? We have to do that at times. And as we saw from the passage, Jesus was laying down the law, and he had this balance, right? Which is where we get to the liberation quadrant. There was a balance of making sure people have everything they need to succeed and holding them accountable to that. The grace of we're given this grace to live our lives, but we're also, there's truth, there's objective truth, there's this balance we have to navigate. And it's not a perfect navigation. It's the calibration is what they like to use in the Giant language of, you kind of have to read into a relationship, and you have to read into where you are and where you are, and or where the other person is, and balance that out, because some people are going to tend to be one of the other. Like I tend to draw more towards challenge. Like it's much more natural to me. If Jesus was talking to me, I'd have been the one, as you talked about, who was bringing judgment to more people, because it's just, that's my tendency, is to lean more towards challenge. Is just easier. Supporting is like less natural for me. So it's an intentional walk I have to have, and that's the support challenge matrix in a nutshell. And we'll discuss it more as we keep going. You got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, just as we think about the support challenge, again, I mean, this is really important for us, especially as leaders. Like we all want to have influence on people's lives as a leader, and that's a good thing. And just wanting to do that really well. And so I think the main thing about this matrix of support challenge, I know it's been impactful even in my own life as I've thought about it. It just has to become, again, the beam in your own eye splinter idea, like thinking through self-evaluation, being humble, just recognizing, hey, we all have those gaps in our life that we want to fill in. And so I know this has been really helpful for me, because sometimes where I struggle is even articulating in the influence, like, okay, am I influencing this person's life? And am I doing that in a healthy way? Am I doing that in a negative way? I mean,
Yeah.
because we're all using influence in some extent. So this has just been a really helpful tool for me, to see where some of my gaps are and shortcomings are, in my leadership, and still have those, but at least I'm, aware of it and trying to work towards shoring some of those up.
Yeah. It's really nice to have the language attached to the
Mhm.
tendencies we all have, right? We all really, if we know it or not, we all operate on this somewhere. And there's leaders you've seen who were really good at making sure you had what you need. And there's leadership who just yelled at you and they were not in a healthy space. And it was
Mhm.
an interesting balance. But the beautiful thing about the support challenge matrix is when you pair it with the 5 circles of influence. And so as we talk about the beam in your eye, it's that these tools are great because they're really biblical principles that have just been illustrated out by this organization, and the 5 circles of influence is the other tool that's often paired with this, and it starts with yourself. Like that's the first circle, right?
Mhm.
Your um, influence is going to have to start with you. So you're either going to over support yourself, right? And you're going to allow yourself all these extras. Like, well, maybe I should eat the extra. Maybe I should have 2 tubs of ice cream tonight. And I've had a long day, so I'm not going to work out. And I woke up late, so I'm not going to read my Bible. And oh, I'll
Mhm.
catch up and pray with God later. And you kind of give yourself these outs, right? These excuses. You're
Mhm.
providing a lot of support to that. Or maybe you're way too hard on yourself and you're like, no, I have to read my Bible for 33 minutes, 62 or 24 seconds because that's how many I have to read through the whole Bible in a year. I don't know what it is, but um, and you dominate yourself, right? You're like, no, I got to do better. I got to get it.
Mhm.
And the first circles where it starts with, you have to find that healthy calibration. And as I think Jesus, or I know Jesus would want you to be healthy in that space. He would want you to have that balance of knowing there's a standard we're trying to live to, but also giving yourself the grace to know like you have to balance out how you treat yourself because that's where it's going to start. And the people that are going to experience that the most is your family, which is that next circle as we talk about. And one of the things that's really critical is, um, as you've gone through the last few series, it's been a lot about leadership in the Bible. And as we went through First Timothy, right? It was First Timothy. First
Mhm.
Timothy. We talked about sole priority. It was character. What was interesting to me is that when Paul is articulating out how elders should be operating, he talks about their family. And so, why do you think that's such a critical, given what we're talking about? Why do you think that was a critical? Do you think that was a very intentional aspect he brought into that? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, of course, because as we talk about, even the support challenge matrix, as we talk about the spheres of influence, I think you were alluding to a little bit earlier that you can't give away something that you don't
Yeah,
have, right? I mean, that's like my dad would tell me that time and time again. You cannot, you can fake it for a little while, but if you're, especially in the Christian life, if you're not serving people and your influence isn't out of the overflow of what God is doing in your life. Not that we
yeah,
don't, you're going to have dry seasons. You're going to have times where you don't, you're struggling maybe a little bit more than others. But generally speaking, the idea is that, we're filled with the Spirit and we're called to serve and to give out of the being of who God has called us to be, right? Rather than just do all the time and go all the time. I said do a couple of times. I probably shouldn't have said that, but that's funny. Hey, we can laugh. All right. And so back to kind of your question though. So we're serving from a place of, okay, this applies to me first, right? And then those spheres of influence are so important. And Giant lists those out, but they're, like you're saying, they're very biblical, because my wife and my kids are going to have a front row seat to the character of my life,
hmm
far more than the church, or far more even than the staff. I mean, you guys have a little bit more of a view of my character than maybe the person that's just the average church attender on a Sunday. But Bethany, my wife, sees me in my good and my bad. Like she sees the flaws unlike anybody else. My children, right? Because they just have the exposure to your life, and so why what the biblical principle there is, look, when it comes to elders and deacons and some of these roles in the office, like I'm not perfect, nobody's perfect, we're all flawed human beings. Like perfection is not the standard, but there is this idea of we're pursuing Jesus, and we're pursuing Jesus personally in our inner being, and then
Mm-hmm.
that's trickling out of us in the levels of, in those spheres that surround our life. So if God is at work in me, then he's not gonna skip over my family and go to my office, the people I met with at the office or in my neighborhood, right? It's like this idea of consistency in our life. And so yeah, it's tough, Paul tells Timothy, but hey, if you're not leading your family well, and you're not, um, demonstrating Christ-like character in your family, then, what's the point of skipping over that and going to leading in a church context, or leading in a, an office business context? It just breaks down. So those concentric circles are very important, and they are that way because they're measured in proximity to our life on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you're hitting on right there is the idea that you are who you are when nobody's around. Like that's who
Yeah,
your core is, right?
that's what
Yeah.
I think you could even define character that way.
Yeah.
Character is, who are you when nobody's who am I when nobody's watching? What am I looking at on my phone? What am I looking at on the TV? How am I interacting with those people that won't ever see me again? I mean, those are all very, very vital questions, because that goes to the heart of what's in
Hmm.
here.
Yeah. And if you've started with the core, right, it's a lot easier to work your way out. And as we go from family to, as you talk about the people at the
Hmm.
office, your team that you're working with, that's people that they get an inside look kind of, but they don't really get to the core, right, where yourself and where your family's at
Hmm.
oftentimes. And then you move out again, then you get to your organization. So that in our context would be the organization of Tab. For someone else, that could be the organization of Tab and their organization at work. And then you have your community, right? And so as you talk about these circles, and the exercise we're going to go through is looking at each circle and saying, okay, am I dominating myself, or am I supporting myself healthily, or in a healthy way, and am I liberating myself, or am I abdicating my responsibilities? And one of the trends that you see sometimes is people oftentimes will dominate themselves, right? Especially like very high performing people that dominate themselves. They will abdicate their family, right? And then they get to their team and they try to dominate their team, and then the organization thinks they're liberating because they're just getting all these results and they're so awesome. And so there's like, it's not that um, it's a lot easier for all the circles to be green if the first circle's green, right? If you're
Hmm.
relying on God in these moments, that's where it's going to trickle out. But if you get that one wrong, you're going to have a rainbow going through. It's going to be grays from abdication. It's going to be red from domination. It's going to be yellow from the overprotection you're experiencing, and maybe you'll have a green circle, but it's that green circle is really a perception piece. Again, it's not back to your core, and right, because
Hmm.
you talked about like that's the who you are at your core. If you start with health right there, of saying like I'm going to trust God, I'm going to grow, I'm going to do the work, right? It takes time to take the beam out of your eye. That's a eyes freak me out, so the idea of having to pull something out of your eyes just making my eyes water. But like that's a process. That self-reflection process takes time, and
Uh-huh.
when you look at the circles in that way,
Mm.
and you say, okay, I've got to start with myself, and then I've got to work my way out. It, like you said, I think you said consistency. It's like it creates this consistent outpouring, right? And it's all from a source of health, right? Because
Yeah.
what's keeping the self green isn't like us white knuckling it. It's faith, right?
Hmm.
It's trusting God. It's saying, man, I made a mistake. I'm struggling this way. I want to learn. I want to grow. And it's taking that, the way you described, uh, what was it? I think it was discipleship as the continual process of how do you say it exactly? The continual process of pursuing Christ likeness, I think it was, and you described it as something that's constant and ongoing and consistent. It's not limited to a specific space. It's
Hmm.
you're doing it whether you mean to or not, and it really is that influence piece.
Yeah.
If you and I'm sorry. Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, the way we oftentimes talk about discipleship, it's the continual process of knowing and applying the
Right.
teachings of
Right.
Jesus to our life. And so an ongoing process. That's not a class you go to or a season of your life. We're always in that process of knowing the scriptures, being in the Word of God, and then the applying is that's part and parcel to it. So
That's the hard part.
yeah,
Yeah, that's the hard part. Well,
part
that's
and
pretty
parcel.
much
Did you like
pretty
that?
much all we
You like
got.
that
Yeah, that's a
saying,
big
Daniel?
word. Oh,
You know
nope.
what
Hold
that
on.
is?
Wait. I want to cover the last piece. Big words. So, um,
It's 3 words: part and parcel.
parcel.
Yeah, go. Keep going.
Okay, we're not gonna cut that. We're leaving it in. I don't know what he's talking about. All right. So Jack Warren, a mentor of yours, said
Yeah.
this quote that you passed out to me. Actually, I don't know who you gave it to, but it says, "Leading ourselves well requires 24-hour attention, learning new ways of living and working, being vulnerable and open to feedback, working hard at developing and keeping great friendships, and implementing a variety of practices/rhythms that point us in the direction of overall health." Right. That's a big statement. And so take a couple minutes. Tell us about Jack, Mr. Warren, and tell us how you've seen him live that out and how that's impacted you and his influences impacted you.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack Warren was executive pastor of the church that I came from. I had an opportunity to serve under him. He was my direct supervisor for most of the time that I was there. And, he was so influential in my life because he was the one that helped me realize that leadership starts with yourself first. And that was a novel concept for me. I mean, growing up, I always thought about leadership is like, okay, that's a role that somebody has, or that's a position that somebody has. And that's about, the idea of influencing other people. I could get that. But the idea of that true leadership trait that makes or breaks you at the end of the day. It's not about, how you can lead other people, which that's important, but it begins with how can you actually lead yourself. And so if I live my life thinking through that lens that, okay, my top priority is to actually lead myself first, it's incredibly challenging to do, number one. But it's also like, wow, that's of utmost importance. If that's the case, if my leadership of self is going to impact everything else, then that's huge. And so Jack really helped me to think through that. And if you listen to that quote and break it down, we're in that. You never can escape that. So every moment of every day, we're leading ourself because we're making conscientious choices that are either going to support the character and the conviction that we say we have, or they're not. And I think that's what just is so powerful about that quote is that, all right, to lead myself, I'm constantly in that process of evaluation. I'm constantly in that process of, okay, am I willing to do the hard first for me just before I start challenging other people. It's a little thing, but one of the things that I always do every week, every Monday when I wake up, I start my week off by doing something that's going to be physically challenging for me. And I know, like, I'm not negating the spiritual. I spend time in the Word and all of that, but it's just a way to say, okay, as I begin a new week, am I willing to do the hard for me first? Am I willing to lead myself well first and prioritize that time? And that kind of sets the pace for the rest of the week. It's like a mental reset for me as I then go into the office on Mondays and write the sermon. And that's just an example of one way that we're making choices and we're leading ourselves first. And we're leading ourselves either in that direction of health and growth, or we're allowing ourselves to be influenced in the other direction. And I think Jack he really helped to articulate that for me over those years, and that quote speaks directly to that.
Yeah, and I think what's sort of intrinsic in this quote is that leading yourself or leading ourselves is, as he says, 24-hour attention is, as we talked about, like that's the who you are when nobody's around. It's the constant whatever you're doing, in the dark or when you don't think anybody's looking. That consistent. Are you liberating yourself and you're bringing challenge and support in a healthy way, in a healthy balance, or are you leaning one more on the other or don't have either? And I think as I've taken the time to try and learn this more and more, it's helped me see even in my relationship with Jenna where I'm like sometimes I'm typically might be in the green and I'm liberating and I feel like I'm doing a good job and the relationship seems good, and then I just say something wrong and I say it, maybe I didn't say the wrong words but I said it the wrong way and I tipped over into one of the other quadrants and now I'm in an unhealthy space. But the for me like there's just the tools together, thinking through how am I leading myself, how am I leading my family, right? And it's I think it's good that it's spheres of influence, and that's the phrase we're using, right? And I think back to what you said at the beginning, it's kind of been rolling back around in my head of you're influencing other people and you want to lead yourself first. But it's also critical, even especially as we talk about community and doing life together, that we have other people who we're allowing to influence
Yeah.
us, right? And that I think that's a win. That's why we're in Summit. That's why we're sitting here. That's why we're doing the groups, is because we being in the same room together, growing together, and the key word there's together is a huge win,
Yeah.
right? Jesus spent time alone. He spent time praying, but when he got around his disciples, that was a great opportunity for them to hear and learn. And I mean, I'm sure he enjoyed that as well. It was probably a great part of his ministry. But yeah,
Can I ask you just to make it practical with people? I think it might be helpful because when we say leading ourselves and then support challenge, just on a real practical level, like is there an example maybe you could give of like what does it look like for you, like in your own personal leadership of yourself? What does it look like for you to support and challenge yourself?
that's a good one. So in the most practical, the way I imagine it is, and a an easy example is when things go wrong. Am I looking at myself and am I like talking down to myself? I'm like, man, Daniel, you're stupid. You're an idiot. Why are you so stupid and slow? Or why are you so incompetent? Or whatever phrase you want to put there, right? That's dominating myself, right? That's not helping anything. That's not building me up in any way, right? I don't need to talk like that to myself, just like I wouldn't need someone else to talk to me like that. That's not going to solve anything. But on the other side, am I going through something difficult and am I just vegging out where I'm like, well, you know what? It's fine. I'm going to continue being lazy, right? As you talked about like physical health, which I really think is tied a lot to spiritual health. Am I going through something? So I'm just going to check out, right? I'm going to, instead of helping Jenna, with Lucy and with dinner and with whatever tasks we have to do or cleaning the house, because I'm having a hard day, right? I'm going to just check out, right? And sometimes we need space to grow. But as we're trying to lead ourselves, right? As we're trying to support and challenge ourselves, an easy way to think of it is, do I have what I need to accomplish this goal, right? If I'm setting a goal for myself, do I have the training I need? Do I have the time, right? If you're trying to accomplish something that takes an hour and you've got 10 minutes and then you're like, oh man, right? That doesn't make any sense. You haven't provided yourself enough support. And sometimes what that looks like as you're trying to calibrate them is providing the challenge to say, okay, I have to challenge myself to structure my schedule in a way that I can be disciplined, right? And so that means waking up early, right? So right now I'm going through, right now I'm working here, right? I'm working at, on the side, I got another job. I'm in full-time graduate school, and I've got Lucy and Jenna. And like my number one priority in all of that is Jenna and Lucy, right? Making sure that they're taken care of. Sometimes I have to move different days on what I'm focusing on, and sometimes that means even when I get home from work, I still got school to go do, like I do today. And the support is, yes, I'm exhausted, and yes, I'm tired, and yes, I got a busy schedule. That's just the season I'm in, right? But I also have to have the challenge to say, okay, but I've still got things to do. Like I'm still holding myself accountable. I still got to be there for Jenna and Lucy. Number one priority is make sure I'm finding health during the week. And then part of that is a Sabbath, right? That's a support piece. Making sure I have what I need. I have a reset.
Yeah,
I
that's
have
huge.
a Saturday. I don't do anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm spending time with my family. I'm
Yeah.
cleaning up around the house, just piddling around, having a good time watching Lucy watch Bluey or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's the support for me.
Yeah.
The challenge is, but I also got school to do. So that means if I have to stay up late on some weeks or on some weekdays or on Sunday night and do school to get it turned in, like that's what you got to do.
Yeah.
If I want to be healthy, the challenge is, okay, waking up early and working out, right? The support in that is going to bed early, right? Why would you make it more difficult? How can I make life more simple in some ways to be able to accomplish more? And I think in the Christian life, right, where we're trying to make it as practical as possible, as we're trying to lead people, is seeing that God is providing us with grace, right? And I think a big piece of this is trusting God and letting Him be the source of strength, right? I want to bring support into my life. Well, I'm just going to trust God, right? This year wouldn't be nearly as easy if it wasn't for the time I set aside to say the way I provide support in my life to then care for my family is by tapping into the strength God already has for me, right? Like to what He's doing for me, what the strength He's giving to me, the peace He's giving me, that's the support I need. The challenge is God has given me these skills and these passions and these desires and these opportunities. I'm now going to go execute on them. I'm not going to be lazy and say, well, it's fine. Someone else maybe talk to him about Jesus, or, someone else is going to go do whatever God's calling me to do. Like the support is having what I need to be successful, right? Which God provides us the opportunity to have. And the challenge is gritting your teeth and saying, I'm going to do it. Even when it's hard, I'm just going to do it, and that looks different for everybody. In my life, it's going to look different. Next year, it's going to look radically different than it does this year, hopefully. So, yeah. What about you? What would you say?
No, yeah, that's good. I just like how I like trying to make it as practical as possible. I think, for me and the way that I lead myself tends to be more through domination. Like I set a high standard for myself, and I feel like if it's like a house of cards. If my routine falls out of whack or something, then the whole thing is gonna. And the Lord's been working with me on that. I think the way that I tend to lead other people is more through like protection. Like I want to like support people and not so much bring the challenge where I feel like I'm challenging myself. But I think a really practical thing, kind of like what you were talking about, is for the first several years I was at Tab, I was just like so locked in and like, oh, I gotta go, and I didn't take a day off during the week, and Sundays were a full day. Saturdays would oftentimes have a funeral or a wedding or something. And so, I just like felt really convicted about that. And I've been much better here in this season of just having Fridays where I take Fridays off, and I think I convinced myself in my head, in the past, well, I kind of take Mondays off so I can write the sermon and that, I don't know, it is what it is. But, I just use that as a really practical example of like, that was a way that I helped to kind of break up some of the crust of that domination of myself, of this fear of like, if I didn't go all the time, that like something would happen or something would fall through the cracks. And as I've been diligent on supporting myself better, because I need that time to rest, I need that time to just connect with God, connect with my wife. I've discovered that, wow, I'm a much healthier person. I actually get more done by being disciplined on having that time off than I did, prior to it. So that's maybe one practical way that I've tried to both support and challenge myself a little bit better in this season.
Yeah, and I think as you point out, the balance, the calibration there is where when you are showing up at work or whatever it is, you're showing up healthier. Right? Whenever you're showing up for your family, you're showing up healthier because you're balancing them, and it's not just a only challenge myself, but there is a reset. But that's all the time we got for this week. I think I don't see what it says, 44, a little high right there. All right, well, that's it for week 5, Splinters and Beams. We're so happy you're here. I hope you enjoyed it. We went a little further than we wanted to.
It's my fault. Don't blame Daniel.
We're some yappers.
We're yappers.
Last week, or the last video, Sarah and Tawana went for 18 minutes. So 18 minutes.
Man, we need to learn from them. They're the goats.
Yeah, we're going to go back and review that and take some notes. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.